There you go. Sure. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you as always, thank you for trekking out of your homes on a relatively sort of nice evening, but a little bit cooler. As you've realized by now, every section of the book of Shmuel that we are covering has within it so many gems, so many amazing insights, and it's very hard to. That was the problem in writing what I wrote, the book, because what do you include, what do you not include? There's so much, and it was interesting today that I teach at the Kollel in the morning. And there's a teacher there from Yerushalayim, Ashi, whatever his name is, I've forgotten. Very, very, very wonderful Talmid Chacham, and he had to admit to me that he's struggling with learning Nach. He's learning Sefer Malachim. So I promised him, when the next book comes out, he'll have something to look at. He was quite happy about that. It's challenging. These things are really, really challenging. Tell you a story. We all know about, or have heard of, the relationship between David and Jonathan and David. Must have been about 20, 25 years ago in Israel. They had a debate in the Knesset. And it was at the time when they were talking about gay rights and everything was sort of developing in that direction, all the discussion that they had. And one of the bright sparks of whichever party it was, but certainly not one of the, I'm assuming it wasn't one of the religious guys, stood up and said, well, we have a wonderful example of gay rights in the Bible. It's obviously David and Jonathan. And, it was pretty shocking. And it was, why is it shocking? Not because of what he said per se, but the level of his ignorance was really breathtaking. That really was the problem, because he hadn't read the story. You can't make a pronouncement and say something without at least doing your homework. And once you've actually read what we're going to read this evening, the story of David and Jonathan and how they related to each other, there is a big question, right? The big question is almost obvious without even reading the book, that Jonathan, being the son of Shaul the king, becomes the best friend of the challenger to the throne, right? In other words, normally in politics and in stories of kings and queens over the hundreds and hundreds of years, you don't usually get the prince of the realm being best friends with a guy who's going to eventually take over from him and essentially from his father. And David and Jonathan, there seems to be this phenomenal relationship. This connection, and we have to understand what is the depth, what is the real deal over here. How do we understand the beautiful the language that they use with each other? They're so respectful, and on the contrary, it's more than that. They admire each other in such a positive way. It's very inspiring, right? Today, the whole question of friendships and everything else, is really challenging, and people. Today, unfortunately, it's the whole question of human relationships has been taken over by that little machine that we all have in our pocket, which seems to become our best friend, even though it really isn't. And it's a problem, that how this concept of speaking to each other, relating to each other, how do we do this? And chapter 18 is just so precious. It's so beautiful. I mean, again, we can only do a little bit of justice to it, but I want to just try and deal with this basic question as we go through it. How could David and Jonathan be the best of friends when, according to all the rules of kingship, they should be the best of enemies, right? And I think this is something which will make us think when we go through the text. So again, what we're going to do, we're going to run through the chapter. It's not a short chapter. Chapter 18 is quite long, but we'll see how it goes. There's a digression here about one of David's marriages, or supposed marriages, which never took place. Again, if you look at the back of the book that I put out recently, there's a whole family dynamic of King David. All right, so to talk about David with gay rights when he's married to 6 wives, I'm not quite sure how one deals with that. But anyway, I don't know. You never know today. It could be possible. Ger Chosid, or as my mother used to say, "Gay Gesundheit," which was her comment on the whole genre. But she was 25 years ago. She passed away. So I don't know. It's a strange world we live in. What can I say? Now, listen to this. chapter 18. It's phenomenal. So we had the conversation. Shaul was talking to Abner, his cousin, and he said, "Cousin Abner, tell me, who is this young man who went out to fight Goliath?" And it was a strange question because he knew exactly who he was. So the whole discussion was, who is he? What's his yichus? In other words, where does he come from? What's his background? What's his family? And he was told he's from the line of Peretz, therefore he's the line of kings. Kol Beseder, well, not a Kol Beseder, because as far as Shaul is concerned, he's beginning to understand that David is the man who's going to take over. He's already been told by Shmuel that he's not going to continue, it's not going to go as a dynasty forever in the family of Shaul, and David will be taking over. But at this point, it's still, let's put it this way, it's still at the level of guessing as far as Shaul is concerned, but the guess is becoming pretty strong. So this is after the conversation that Shaul has with Avner. The Nefesh Yonatan, and Yonatan clearly was standing there and is listening to David, and he is totally enamored. He's bold. You would say in the vernacular, he's blown away by David. The Nefesh Yonatan nikshra b'nefesh David. His soul is bound to the soul of David. We'll discuss that expression later on. V'yehav who I think it is. Yonatan kanafsho, and Yonatan loved David kanafsho as in the way he loves himself. There is a whole discussion. The Ramban Nachmanides says this beautiful definition of ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor like yourself. What does that mean? Right? And he says that the basic concept is to be as thrilled for your neighbor's success, to be more thrilled when your neighbor, your friend succeeds than if you yourself had succeeded. If you make a small fortune, you should be happy that he makes a big fortune, right? And this is really a discussion which we're going to come back to at the end of the Perek. But this is what's going on. Yonatan, instead of being supremely jealous and angry and aggressive towards David, goes in completely the opposite direction, which is not obvious, and it's phenomenal. Pasuk bet. In the meantime, King Saul is very challenged. He's going through a tremendous depression. He had this great spirit of Hashem, he's gone away, and what's left behind, unfortunately, is a little bit of mental stress and all the things that we read about today. Shaul took David on that day. This is it. David is now conscripted into the army of Shaul, and he's not going back home. For him to sit and play with the sheep is not necessarily what should be done. David needs to be involved with the matters of state. Now, Gimel. They made a covenant. Now, these covenants are very difficult to explain what exactly that is. The story of Avram, that they split the animals, and it's a sign of the animals coming, two halves make a whole, right? We just did Parshat Shkalim, the half shekel, 2 shekels, halves make a whole. So the idea of a covenant is that it brings two halves, two sides into a new connection, a relationship. Ba'avoto oto kanafsho, in the way that he loved him like his own soul. This is over and above the normal description. This avoto kanafsho goes on and on like that, because there is something very unique. And as I said, we've got to understand what it is. But listen to this. Not only is Yonatan enamored with David, but he gives him his suit. He gives him his kingly robes, right? You know, the kings used to wear these magnificent robes or whatever it was. The prince presumably would have his own uniform. He took off his cloak or whatever he was wearing. He gave it to David. Umadav, and his uniform, because they're still going to fight many wars. Ad charbo, ad kashto, ve'ad chagoro, even as far as giving him his belt. Unbelievable. He gave him his sword, gave him his bow, everything, all of the weapons that Yonatan had. And of course, remember what we said, that part of the problem was that it was very rare to have your own weapons. Okay, what used to happen is that people had to buy their own guns. Well, in those days, the bows and arrows or whatever, you had to pay for it yourself, which does really beg a belief, but that's what they used to have to do. So in this case, the prince has all of this gear, all of this special paraphernalia that he has. He hands it all over to David as a sign of friendship, maybe as a sign of acquiescence. He's agreeing to the fact he knows Jonathan has twigged already that David is going to be the new king. Plus again, it's a beautiful continuation. David has no sense of animosity towards the king whatsoever. Even though the king is looking at him, as you'll see in a minute, with a very, he's not trusting David. He already recognizes that David represents a challenge to his leadership. The reality is that David has no bone in his body which goes against the king. David is totally and utterly in favor of King Saul. It's beautiful. And it says Yaskil, he was successful. Whatever Saul did to send David, Yaskil is Lashon Seichel. So in order to be successful, no surprises that sometimes it boils down to common sense. All right, you need to use common sense. And this is the expression that the Bible uses the whole time. Yaskil meaning Yatzliach, to be successful. And of course, David is immediately promoted to Ramakal, or the equivalent. And it says that David was so beloved that even the people accepted him. And that is incredible because he's come from left field. He's come out of nowhere. And nevertheless, once the story of Goliath gets around, everybody hears about it. If they weren't actually there, David becomes beloved to the whole of the Jewish people. And this, of course, is, again, such a beautiful future, almost a prophecy, that David will remain beloved to everyone sitting in this room. How do I know that? Because we spend most of our time reading the words of King David. Go to shul in the morning, we're going to do Hallel. It's all David Amal. We're going to spend most of the davening. And if you don't daven, then sometimes you say Tehillim, you do all these things. It's all King David. And we spend our time reading the words of King David. We don't stop, right? So he's beloved and continues to be beloved to this very day. Quite remarkable. I mean, if you think about it, it's truly remarkable. Again, I think I told this story, but I'll tell it very quickly. I was on the A train going down to, from Washington Heights, going down to Midtown to teach at YU, and two people sitting side by side on the train. One was a young lady going to Stone College. She was late. She was davening on the train. Not a good idea, especially the subway is really quite not the place to daven. Let's put it that way. But sitting next to her was a Spanish lady reading her Bible quite religiously in Spanish. I looked over, and what were they both reading? Ashrei Yoshrei V'techa. They're reading Psalm 145. One was doing it in Hebrew, one was doing it in Spanish. I don't think they realized, sitting next to each other, what was going on. But it was so again, before cell phones, this is going back 20 years, had I had the chance to take a picture, it would have been a classic photo. This is what King David is about. He unites the whole world, not just beloved to us, beloved to the whole world. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. I mean, these are words that even your neighbor, your non-Jewish neighbor, hopefully will be aware of. So this is what, again, I get inspired by psukim like this, that David became beloved in the eyes of everybody. Pasuk Va, so now he's come back from smiting Goliath. And listen to this. This is not going to happen in the certain neighborhoods in Israel today. But the women come out, right? There's going to be a guard of honor waiting for him of ladies. Mikol Yisrael Lashir, they're coming out to sing, Vahamacholot, and to play musical instrument. Go figure. Likrat Shaul HaMelech, they're coming to greet the king. B'tupim, b'simcha, b'shalishim, they've got cymbals and they've got drums and simcha with great joy. I mean, this is a real reception going on. And what do they say? And they comment on the situation. V'ta'anena nashim, and this is the refrain. Hamasachakot, the women who are rejoicing, singing out loud. What do they say? V'tamarna, they say, Hika Shaul Balafav, but David, but Rivavotav. Saul kills thousands, David tens of thousands. Very famous. And of course, it's not necessarily criticizing anybody, but for the king, this is very difficult to hear because he wants to be the greatest warrior and he isn't anymore. David has taken over. And the contrast between the king, who is 6'9" or whatever he is, and David, who's about 5'2", he's very small. And David is killing more Philistines than anybody else. This becomes, again, another chink in the armor for the king. He can't quite handle it. Shaul becomes very angry because, even though the women are praising and the women are singing and everything else, for Saul, this is very painful. So this became very bad in his eyes. They're talking about tens of thousands for David. They only gave me thousands. In other words, look what they're doing. And of course, this is thinking out loud. What's next for David? It must be the kingship, right? So this is where Saul finally twigs and understands that David is going to take over. But this is all very, very painful. And he's going through a depression. He's sad. He's upset. All of this, roll it into the story, and it becomes very difficult. However, David, Saul is keeping oyen, from the word ayin. He's keeping an eye. Some say ayin hara. He's putting an ayin hara on David. Mehayom hahu v'hala, from that day on. In other words, he knows that David is now a competitor. He's going to be the new king. And Saul is going to keep, as you would say, his beady eye on him. Next day, he goes to one of his depressions again from God. This is a bad spirit. And he has a prophecy within the house. Right? Is it a real prophecy? According to the translation, it says he raved. Now, the modern meaning of a rave is not necessarily what we're referring to here, as far as I understand. But here, raving means, like we say in the expression, raving mad. He started going around the house. I don't know what he was doing, but it says he was prophesying. And David is playing his instrument, trying to calm the king down, as he did every day. And Shaul is holding a spear. Now, when a person's going through a depression and he's not in a good frame of mind, having today a gun in his hand, not a good idea. You want to get that away from the person immediately. And what does Saul do? It's a crazy story. So Saul took the spear and he threw it. And of course, who is he aiming for? The person now he sees as enemy number one, even though one wonders what it was like sitting in that room where David is playing the harp or whatever he's playing and trying to calm the king, and the king picks up a spear and throws it at it. I mean, you're talking about David. If I was David, I'd be out of there in 2 seconds. I'd run a mile, right? It's a bit like the Ibn Ezra says about the Akedah. Ibn Ezra says that everyone says that Yitzhak was 37 years old. So Ibn Ezra said 37-year-old man with his father coming at him with a knife would have been running out of there quicker than you and me put together. The road running, right? He's at exit stage left. And the reality is that, and that's a good kasha. So Ibn Ezra says that he couldn't have been 37, he must have been 12, right? And that spoils all of the teaching moments in many, many schools, but I don't want to go there. The reality is that here also, if I was David, I'd be one spear is enough to get me out of the room, right? And what did Saul say? He says, I'm going to throw target practice. I want the spear to go through David into the wall. And David let him do it twice. Now, there's a suggestion that David, when he was playing the harp, he wasn't really focusing on what the king was doing. So it's one of those moments where he bends one way, the spear goes past his right ear, and he bends another way, and the spear goes past his left ear. Whatever it is, whichever way you picture this, it's a very, very difficult moment, and David is prepared to give Shaul the benefit of the doubt. Quite extraordinary. The character of David is above and beyond. He's really a very special guy, as we'll see. Pasuk Yud Bet. Now Shaul realizes that he didn't get David the way he wanted to, so he becomes afraid. I think this is where he realizes, God is on David's side. It says quite clear in the pasuk that Hashem was with him. Shaul sar, and he moved away from Shaul. In other words, God has now abandoned Shaul, and he is with David. Wow. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Shaul meimo. So what does Shaul do? He's planning, how am I going to get rid of this guy? Right? Because in the end, Shaul wants to hold on to power. As difficult as his mindset is, he realizes once he's tasted the glory of power, of running Am Yisrael, he doesn't want to give it up. So he decides, and this becomes a theme right through this chapter, and it continues a little bit, that I'm going to put David in the front line. The irony is when David and Bathsheba's story comes around, what does David do to Uriah? Put him in the front line, right? So this is kind of a punishment in a way, or midah keneged midah for David, because he was criticized for what he did with Uriah. And you know what? In the end of the day, David sort of should have understood not to do that, and he went ahead and did it. And he should have learned from his father-in-law Shaul not to put someone in the front line like this. But this is what Shaul did. So David was fighting, literally leading the army, Braveheart, he was calling the troops. That was David David at this point, and he was in the front line. And again, the pasuk is beautiful. Pasuk Yudala, God was with him, and David was successful. Nobody could touch him. And Saul, as far as he was concerned, they was very successful. Yagar mipanav, and Yagar is the Hebrew word ma'agar, is to store something. Not only was he afraid, he's storing up the fear. It's becoming overpowering in the mind of Shaul. Yagar is more than fear. He's petrified. Yisrael v'Yehuda David, and it stresses that on one hand the king is getting more and more paranoid, and on the other hand the Jews are getting more and more in love with David, even Yehuda, and certainly Yehuda, his own tribe. He's leading the army. So you've got this very strange dynamic sort of, I don't know how to even describe it, where the king is going in one direction, David's going the other direction, the people are following David, they're not abandoning the king. That's a mistake that people make, that Saul, because he's losing his mind and to a certain extent, people abandon him. It's not true. They did not abandon the king, they had tremendous respect for him.
From people's perspective, David represents Shaul.
And he is and
from David's perspective, he is fighting the wars on behalf of
correct, and he doesn't see
loyal. He's Mr. Loyal.
Correct, and he doesn't see it as a challenge.
But people see that in him.
Correct, and that's why David is such a tzaddik, because he's just been used as target practice, and he it's either David is so what's the word? He's such a naive person that he didn't realize what Saul was doing, or he's such a tzaddik that it didn't bother him to the point where he should disassociate from the king. He's going out there fighting the wars on behalf of the king of Israel. Amazing. Listen to this. Shaul David. And now Shaul says, well, I'm making a plan, but I've got to make sure that the plan goes through. I'm going to make sure by marrying David to one of my daughters. He had two daughters at the time, one called Meirav and one called Michal. Michal is the one who we'll get to know a bit better. So what happened here, and this is a strange story, because remember when David came to the front line, he was told by the men, if he kills Goliath, the king will make a special prize that you'll be able to marry the king's daughter. So of course, at this point, David seems to be convinced that this is the one. So what did Saul say? Hinei biti agdola Meirav. I've got my older daughter Meirav. Ota etein lecha lisha. He said, I'm going to give you a wife. Achayeli leben chayil, but you remain a soldier. Ilachem milchamot Hashem. You fight the wars of God. Shaul Omar al tehi yadibo. And Shaul said to himself, I'm not going to take my hand to him. In other words, the king is allowed to kill someone who he considers to be a rebel. And as far as Saul is concerned, maybe he sees David as a rebel. But he says, I can't bring my hand to kill him. That would be the worst thing that he could ever do, because the people loved David. And Saul to go and kill him, he wouldn't last very long after that. There'd be a rebellion. But he says, I can't bring my hand against him. I'll let the Philistines do the job. So Saul has got a plan, marry him off to Meirav. The problem is Meirav has already got married. Right? Now, why the king didn't know, and why he hadn't booked the hall, and why he hadn't booked the caterer, I really don't know. It's a very strange concept going on here. But look at Yudchet. David el Shaul. So firstly, David, you cry when you read these psukim. He says to Saul, who he loves more, he loves Yonatan in this, you'll see in a spiritual sense, we'll come to that. But he also loves Shaul. He can't bring himself to do anything against Shaul. So he says to Shaul, you want me to be your son-in-law? I'm not worthy, he says. Mi anochi, who am I? Mi chayai, what's my life? Mashpachat avi b'Yisrael, of the family of my father. In other words, I've got no yichus. You want me to be your son-in-law? Really? Ki yayeh chatan lamelech, I'll be your chos and I'll be your son-in-law? But and David just can't understand what's going on here. Again, the tamimus, the purity of this guy is incredible. Yutet, and along comes the moment where Meirav is meant to marry him. She's already been given to Adria. Now that's going to be a story which we're actually going to get back to later on. I think in Perek, whatever it is, I think chapter 25. We'll come back to it because there's a strange dynamic here that Meirav is not really available to marry David at this point. As I said, I don't understand. Maybe this is part of Shaul's illness, that he just doesn't know what's going on around him. And his daughter has already been promised, and maybe he's forgotten, or maybe who knows what was going through his mind. But Meirav is not the one. But what happened next? V'tehav Michal bat Shaul et David. In steps Michal, daughter number 2, and again she should join Yonatan as being the arch enemy of David, because David is the threat to her father, and she can't do enough to become connected to David. Right? There's no shatchonos going on here. This is the lady choosing the man. And it says like this: Vayagidu l'Shaul ve'ishad davar beinam. So Shaul was told. He says, "Beseder, Yeshakar, he'll marry Michal." Apostle Kavala. Vayomer Shaul et nena lo v'tihilo l'mokesh. And again, Shaul is saying, "Okay, daughter number 1 was meant to be the stumbling block. She's now gone off with this other guy, so daughter number 2 will be the stumbling block." And the trouble is, she is a bit of a mokesh. You'll see later on when we deal with Michal, when David is dancing in front of the ark, Michal starts criticizing David. It's very sad. And Michal is punished. He doesn't have children after that point. So there is something which happens later on as a result. All of this is preempting what is going to come later. It says, in the meantime, there will be, the Philistines will again come against David in the mind of Shaul. With one of the 2, you will become my son-in-law. It can't be Meirav, so it'll have to be Michal. And he commands his servants, David Balat, speak, give, whisper into David's ear. You've got to say something to him on my behalf. Lemor. I don't want to make a big announcement because I know you don't feel you're worthy, but at least you'll know from a whisper, from a rumor, whatever it is, it's going to be online and everyone will know about it, that you are going to marry my daughter, and everybody loves you. Again, the way he's talking about David, is there a sense of connection, positive connection, or is he always planning to kill David? It's very hard. I always had this discussion in class, and we never really came to a conclusion, because there's language here of connection, there's language here of respect. At the same time, there's also the agenda behind the scene, which is to put David in a position of danger that he's going to get killed. So this is a real question mark about the mind of Shaul. Again, you have to say, unfortunately, Shaul was not functioning 100%. He was certainly in a state of depression. Pasuk Kaf Gimel. Vayidabrav de David Shaul baznei David. So the servants tell David, what the king said. Again, David says, I'm going to marry daughter number 2. I'm equally as unworthy as I was for daughter number 1. He says, I don't have any money. Very interesting excuse. He says, that they used to have to bring a dowry, right? Good old-fashioned things. And he doesn't have a penny. David was ostracized by the family. Remember, we spoke about that, right? Even Masa Bonim. He was the rejected cornerstone of the Jewish people. And Yishai must have been a man of means, I have to say. But at this point, David is there he claims he's penniless. And how am I going to marry Michal? I can't bring money into the marriage. Pasuk Kafdala, this is a great story. So the servant said, they go back to the king. This is David's excuse. He doesn't want to marry because he has got no money. So King Saul said something which is truly, I'm going to say bizarre, or it's something which is, you can't say this in too many public forums. This is what you got to tell David. I don't want a dowry. I'm the king. I don't need your money. Or a lot plishtim. All I want you to do is go and kill, literally, bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines. Very nice way of putting it. To take revenge on these enemies. right? Go and kill 100 of them and prove it. V'Shaul chashav la'apil et David b'Plishtim again. He'll try and kill 100. They'll surround him. That'll be the end of David. It's all the time he's testing the waters. So the servants told David. Now David loved to kill Philistines. That was his greatest joy in the world. So he thought, "Whoa, this is a winner." And doing that, I'll become the king's son-in-law. It didn't take very long. Who knows? He went out to battle, and 100 dropped in one shot. It's such a crazy story. If you think about it, but it's amazing that David saw this as a positive thing, not as a sign that he's going to go and get surrounded by 100 people and get killed. But this is what the king wants. This is what the Shaul HaMelech has requested. This is what I got to do. Beautiful. And Vayakam David Vayelechu v'anashav, he goes with his men. He realizes, I think David understands he can't do this all on his own. Vayach ba'plishtim matayim. So he said, you know what? I'm going to bring 200 dead Philistines back, or the foreskins, as they say. Vayovei David et orolotehem, and he brought back their foreskin. Vayimalu lemela, and it was full to, in other words, more than what he was asked to do, because he was only asked for 100. He brought back 200, right? Which again, I don't know, boggles the mind. Litchatein b'melech, and of course, at this point, I guess the 200 you can say, because he said you'll get married with one of the two. He may have understood it that I'm getting married to one of the daughters, but I'm going to bring the dowry, which will cover both. If I would marry the second one, I'd have enough of a dowry by killing 200 instead of 100. Maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know. But it's a very strange contract that's going on here. And it says, "Vayitino Shaul et Michal bitol isha," and he married Michal. Vayar Shaul v'yeda. At this point, Shaul knows Ki Hashem im David. Previously, he was afraid that God was with him. Now he knows it's sunk into his existence. Umichal bat Shaul ahaveto, and not only that, but Michal is absolutely besotted with David. Vayesov Shaul leiro ibnei David od, and the king continues to be absolutely afraid of David. Vayishol oyev David kol hayamim. How sad! Now Saul becomes the enemy of David, and you'll see it gets so much worse. He travels around the countryside. Right, this is the outing which you don't want to be on, when the king is traveling with 3,000 men trying to find David to kill him. He goes up north, he goes down south, he's almost in Eilat. The next thing he's somewhere up in the north of the country, and he's riding all over the place trying to find David. We'll get to the story of Noah coming up very soon, which is a terrible story. Posuk Lamed, Vayetzu sarei plishtim vayhi midei tzeitam. At this point, the enemy comes out. Sachal David Mikol Avdei Shaul. At this point, David is successful, and Vayikar Shemo Ma'od, and he becomes very famous amongst the enemy. Right, he's the one they all fear. And again, the contrast, or the how should we call it, the comparison to what we read in chapter 17 with Goliath. They saw their power in the big man, right? And here comes David, who's not necessarily big in stature, but is so brave and is so incredibly successful as a warrior that even the Philistines have to admire him. Incredible. I want to read to you something here which is just so precious. We'll see how much time we have. A few minutes. Yeah.
The way the narrative's been coming through, it almost sounds like, sort of Shmuel standing on the side, and he's he's watching this, and he's documenting what's going on. That's how it sounds.
Yeah.
But is that the case, or was this just Mavua that he had that he was?
No, he is. We're going to see in next chapter, chapter 19, is the only meeting that David and Shmuel have, and it's in a place called Nayot, very nice neighborhood near Shari Tzedek. Over there's a neighborhood. I don't know if it's the same place as the Bible, but Nayot. And what happens is that Shmuel is asked by David. The rabbis fill in the details. It doesn't say what they spoke about. It says they were up the whole night. And what David wanted to know from Shmuel is the plans for the Beit HaMikdash. Because during all of this stuff that's going on, what really is filling the mind of David is to build the temple. That's what he really wants to do. Shivti v'veit Hashem kol yimei chayai.
But surely Shmuel was in a position to stop Shaul?
Yeah, the answer is no, because Shmuel is so distraught at the failure. This is not this week, next week, the Haftarah, which we learned a few weeks ago, the whole thing of the Amalek story. He's so distraught with Shaul's failure to carry out the mitzvah of Hashem that it's almost as if his life's mission has been, I wouldn't say ended, but the end is nigh. And he can't bring himself to move into David's territory. That's going to be different Nevi'im. Natan, God, there's going to be different Nevi'im for David. Shmuel is definitely still around. He's around to chapter 25. He does die in chapter 25, which begs the question, why does it say for Shmuel if he's not around for most of the book? Because Shmuel bet he's not around at all. But he is in the background. Shmuel is always going to be in the background, but he's not now the kingmaker anymore. He's not the main player.
He's done. He's finished.
He's finished.
He's appointed David and anointed David. He's finished as far as he's concerned. And he doesn't want to be perceived as stopping that natural thing. I think
correct.
It's interesting because when we look at this whole chapter, every time Shaul is sending David out to quote, see if he's going to be killed by the Plishtim, it's Shaul is testing really Hashem.
He's testing God.
Am I going to? Is this David? Is he the real deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
If he comes back after all these wars and he's successful, and they haven't been successful in killing him, must mean God's watching over him.
Yeah.
So he, as you say, it starts out as this. Okay, I think he may be the next one. It looks pretty good,
Yeah.
And yet he can't bring himself, as long as he's king, to accept David as king, even though he's accepted the reality, not more than the fact, the reality that he's going to be the next king.
Yeah.
But he's not ready to step down.
No. And one feels for Shmuel the sense of disappointment. I pointed out, when he's done this whole thing of the anointing that we read about a few weeks ago, he turns around, he says, but Yifim Vayel, he just leaves. Doesn't say, you would think, drink a l'chaim, right? Even in the cabinet over here, when they do something, they drink a l'chaim. He didn't do that. He nothing. There is that overwhelming sense of, this was my Talmud, my Talmud Muvhak, this is my par excellence, my student, and he failed. And Shmuel is devastated. Now, he doesn't disagree with David in terms of wanting to discuss the temple. The Gemara makes a whole thing about that he does discuss the details, but he can't bring himself to get now involved with the next part of the situation. He's spent, even though he's only 50 years old, he's 52 when he dies. He was so young.
Maybe the reason that he is so distant with both of them is because he didn't want kingship anyway. To have
we're back to square one. Yeah, and look, it's already showing problems.
And he says,
yeah, that's a good point.
Says, wasn't I good enough?
Yeah.
Shmuel was the one who thought he was the one uniting the country.
Yeah.
He was the one that his mother prayed for in the Mishkan.
Correct.
And brings him to the Mishkan, and he is the one who's like number 2 after Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah.
And so consequently, he feels that this whole thing that God is allowing to happen is his own failure. But God has already said, it's not your failure, Shmuel. It's my failure because the people aren't behaving the way they should be.
Yeah.
So he is actually feeling as if he didn't do enough.
Yeah. He let the side down.
He really allowed the whole question of kingship, and this is after a long time, and they're in Israel, and
there's hundreds of years. The Shoftim was a failure. The system didn't work.
Right.
In the end, you got Pelegesh Begiva and all the terrible stories.
It's all over 400, 500 years.
Yeah, it's a few hundred years.
So Shmuel thought he was going to be the one to take and reunite the country and bring Hashem into the country and get the Plishtim out of there. And by the way, the reason that no one had swords or any kind of weapons is the Plishtim didn't allow metal to weapons of any kind, even farming utensils. It says that they used to have to go. The Israelis, if they had any farming utensils, they would have to go to the Plishtim,
bit like getting the bunker busters from you know who.
Right.
It's a parallel. It never goes away.
The Plishtim are always on the throat of the of the Jews, of the Hebrews.
Yeah.
And Shmuel is just unable to get them out of Israel, out of Eretz Yisrael, and to unite the country. And so he's a mess.
He's devastated. He really is. It's sad.
After all of this.
Yeah. I want to just go back very briefly to talk about David and Jonathan, and just listen to this. I sent this out over the weekend, but just going to read this because this is Yeshua Bachrach, and the man was brilliant. He says, we all know the Pirkei Avot. Kol ha'avash hi tluya b'davar. If love depends on something, batel davar, batel if the matter goes away, then the love goes away. But if it's not, it's unconditional love, then eina batel olam, it never goes away. The love survives. What does that mean? The Perek says, what is the hava which is tluya b'davar? A story we're going to learn, Mitz Hashem, maybe in the next few months. That's Amnon and Tamar, one of the children of David. In fact, both of them were children of David, and a terrible, terrible story, which was based on physical attraction or whatever, and rape, and it's a horrible story. But she'eina tluya b'davar, the love which doesn't in any way depend on anything external, it's pure in the highest sense. Ahavat David v'Yonatan. That's what the Pirkei Avot says. The love of David and Jonathan. The Rambam explains, and the Rambam gives us a clue here. The Rambam says, "Kshetia sibat ava inyan eloki." Why is this love special? Because it's based on something godly. It turns out, and this is something which I thought about a lot. You go back to your yeshiva days, and you always remember there were certain chavrusas, certain guys that would learn, and they would always be learning together, even at the most what I used to call unsociable hours. What are unsociable hours? There were a couple of guys who used to learn. Friday night they would go to the meal, they would hear the kiddush, have a quick bowl of chicken soup, and then they'd be back in the Beit Midrash learning. And everybody else is having their Shabbat meal. You never compromise, even though the food was whatever. But reality was but these guys would learn. There is a sense of connection, of a spiritual connection, which elevates both parties in their pursuit of holiness. It's expression. We know that kinas sofrim tar be'achma. The Gemara says it, that the jealousy amongst the scholars, tar be'achma, increases wisdom. If I'm jealous, meaning that I want to know more because I see somebody else wanting to know more, then by definition that increases wisdom in the world, because I will make an effort to study a bit more. I'm not asking to become, the Gadol Hador, the greatest rabbi of the generation, but I want to improve. I want to sort of go up a notch from as much as I can. Listen to this, because this is beautiful. And this is Reb Bachra. Lefia devarim eilos, according to what we've said here with the Rambam, explaining that this is a spiritual connection between David and Jonathan. Haita vazu inyan eloki, it's a godly connection they have. Lashlim ritzon konam, they are in competition to do the will of Hashem. B'chol zot hayagam inyan enoshi, but he says there's also something very human in their relationship. Kabisha dibarnu, as he explained before, Sha'arei Ramban, and the Ramban says, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Listen to what this means, because we all know this. You should love your neighbor as yourself. What does that really mean? Says the Ramban, and this is the thought for the day. Elat tzivta Torah. The Torah commands, She'ahav chaveiro b'chol inyan. You have a friend. You should be so happy for him. Kasher yahav et nafsho b'chol tov. As if whatever he succeeds, as if you've succeeded. Ki pa'amim, sometimes she'ahav adam et re'ehu, b'dvarim yuduim, that you'll love your friend in certain area, le'tivo ba'osher, that he'll become wealthy, v'lo b'chokhmah, or maybe not with wisdom, but with monetary success, or kiyotze b'zeh, ve'im ye'avo b'chol leiv, if you love the guy, your friend, with your whole heart, yachbot, you will want, you want him to be more successful, not to be jealous and say that he's got all the money, all the success, and you what's the word? You're jealous of him. No, you want him to be more, because that is what V'ahavta l'recha means. He says that even if he's going to be better in everything, You want that person to succeed. V'yitzaver katuv, and he says what the Torah is telling us. Shelo tiyeh b'chitut hakina hazo b'libo. You shouldn't have this sense of jealousy in your heart. Avo yehav brachot hatbechot hatova lechaver. When your friend succeeds, you should absolutely be so happy for that person. Kasher adam oseh lenafsho, as if it's you yourself. V'ahavta l'orecha, love your neighbor, your friend, kamocha, as if it's you yourself having that success. This is quite difficult to do. I have to say, not always easy to do. But you're talking about tzaddikim over here. V'lo yitain shiurim ba'ava. There's no limit to the love that you can express. Ahava comes from the word hav, to give. You give the person the recognition, and you give the person that sense of support and that sense of joy that he's successful. And again, this is the relationship. And he says this is what's going on here. The Alkain Omar Yonatan, that's why it says with Jonathan, Ki ahavat nafsho ahayvo. He loved him as if he loved himself. Meaning that the success of David, Jonathan saw as his own success, but even more so that David was achieving it more than Jonathan. Because Jonathan had removed this sense of jealousy. Milibo. You're going to be the king, and I've come to terms with it, says Jonathan. I'm not going to say he's absolutely ecstatic about it. I don't believe that. But I believe that he felt so happy for David, that David was the right man at the right moment who was going to take the Jewish people into a whole new area of existence. And listen to this final comment. V'hora klal gadol alela mitzvot. This is the Sephono says one of the commentaries when it says ahavta l'recha kamocha, ehav ba'ad recha, love your neighbor, ma shahayita ohev ba'adcha, that he succeeds and achieves what you really want to succeed for yourself. Im heyot magil l'mekomo, if you would be in his shoes. In other words, what's going on over here, says Rabbi so beautifully, that Jonathan and David had this spiritual connection. They had a sense of such respect for each other. And Jonathan realized David is going to run the show. He's going to take over. He gave him his sword. He gave him his belt. He gave him his all of his paraphernalia, his crown or whatever he was wearing. And it doesn't matter, because for Jonathan, the success of David was his own success. And even more so, and instead of being jealous, he overcame the jealousy and loved David with a feeling towards him which was so intense. Now again, this is madrigot of tzaddikim. This is not your average run-of-the-mill. Sometimes we do feel, why did he succeed and why did I not succeed? And this can be between good friends. This can be certainly in families. There's no question about it. I once went to a shiva house where two brothers were sitting sitting. One of the brothers died, but the other brother was sitting away from the rest of the family, because the two brothers had such a fallout over something which they probably even couldn't remember what it was. Right? One had been more successful than the other. That when it came the time that one brother died, the other brother sitting shiva, he's sitting away from the family because they couldn't sit together anymore. So sad. It was really so sad. And this is something where, again, I always argue that you don't need a Musa book in any sense. You've got it all in the Bible. It's all here. David is someone who trains us, who teaches us, number one, to be with the people. Look how he's loved by the people, and he's there totally sacrificing everything for the people. And when you have a positive relationship like he had with Jonathan, it's got to be based on a sense that your friend succeeds. You should even be more happy. Jonathan is happier for David than David is essentially for himself. And one has to assume David felt like this for Jonathan. Jonathan may not have succeeded in the same way that David did, but he felt Jonathan was a special man. What we're going to see, which is so sad, is that Jonathan has to make a choice. Who do I love more? Do I love my father or do I love my friend? And this becomes, in life, can be very difficult, right? Family is sort of, sometimes you have no choices, but sometimes you want to, coming up to Pesach, who do you make the Seder with? You make it with the family or do you make it with your friends? And this becomes a very big chat. I'm not going to comment on that, except what I just said, even though my wife is looking at me with a very strange look. The reality of it is, it's challenging. And yet, what we see here is just so beautiful. This ahava she'ena tluya b'davar. Halavai, we all achieve a friendship like that, in a lifetime. Many people do, but it's for many, it's a work in progress. But that's what we saw this evening. We've touched on the beginning of the essence of David, and what a special person he is. And I would argue, and as I said many times in class, I said that if you're going to go out with David, you're going to have a challenge. But look at what precious man Yonatan was, that he's so happy for David's success. That's a guy that I said to the young lady, if you find a chosen like that, halavai, you'll be in good shape, because he will be so happy for everything that's going on in the family, the achievements, etc. He'll know when to praise. He'll know when to say the right thing. He'll know when to give the right smile and the right pat on the back and all the rest of it. That's a special thing. So Mitzvah Hashem, to be continued. 4 weeks time. 2 weeks time is Purim. Just thought for the day that, isn't it strange that we're having this confrontation with Iran? Purim time, it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. And let's hope by the time we meet next time, that's all in the past and Purim has happened yet again. It's Bayomim Hahem, Bazman Hazeh, those days in this time. Bezrat Hashem, let's hope for the best. In the meantime, everybody have a good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you.